Hello, it is May the 5th, Cinco de Mayo, a day of celebration in cheap Mexican beer, usually in most of the US. I am Matthew Holt, your host. This is THCB Gang. We're doing a little bit of a special one today. I noticed, somewhat by accident to one of the previous gangs, that I had a lot of people on this in my regular lineup who had been touched by cancer in some way. And I was chatting with our special guest today and thought, we've got to do a show just about cancer. So who do we have? We have Rosemarie Day, regulars from our regulars today. Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies, Benz from Siegel Benz, Casey Quinlan from the Healthcare Hilarious podcast, Jeff Goldsmith, health futurist, Neptune from Suntra Modern Recovery. Also these days, his own podcast, this Is It Serious? Grace Cordovano, Enlightening Results on Twitter, and many different other patient advocacies. And our special guest is Adam Pellegini from Jasper Health, which is a relatively new but quite well-funded company in the cancer navigation space. So with that, I'm going to welcome everyone. We're live and about, and I'm going to start this in kind of an interesting way, which is instead of going around and asking people what they've been up to and how they've been doing, I'll ask them about their personal experience with cancer, just to give Adam a better idea about what he's going to be dealing with here, because we're dropping him in the deep end. But he himself has a long history of working with people with folks in the cancer space. So just by random, why don't I start with you, JL, and then we'll go around.
Sure, thank you, Matthew. So my cancer story did not involve me personally. In 2013, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. My mother is doing great right now, so almost 10 years out. But 3 months after my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, my father was diagnosed with a brain tumor. So in the middle of 2013, I found myself being the primary care physician, healthcare navigator, getter of things doneer person in the house who is essentially taking care of two quite sick people. So I actually ended up taking about 6 months off from work and helping my parents get through all the things that they had to get through. And as I said, my mother is still alive, doing great, 83 years old. And my father unfortunately passed away in 2014. But many lessons learned, as Matthew mentioned, I shared some of those lessons learned in a podcast that I recently recorded, and happy to share those experiences and those learnings again today.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Rosemarie.
Hi, everyone. So I also had breast cancer. I did not become as obviously ill, it sounds like, as perhaps your mother was, Jean-Luc, but I was benefited from early detection, hugely benefited from early detection and great health insurance, and basically the ability to be treated pretty immediately. And I was also fortunate that research had been done that allowed for me to pass some kind of test, and I do not remember all the names, where I didn't end up having to go for chemo. And they told me that had it been 8 years earlier, they threw everybody into the chemo bucket. And I was trying very hard to maintain my company and do all the things I needed to do, and felt quite fortunate, and blessed by all the fact that so many people spend a lot of time in labs continuing to push and find out more, so that those of us who are diagnosed can try to continue living our lives as best we can. And so I learned a lot on the journey, and I'm 5 years cancer-free as of now.
Fantastic. And Rosemarie, you also, I don't know, you were recently, we had a whole TCB game about this, were caregiving for both of your mother and your mother-in-law, I believe, recently. And were they, I don't know if I forget, one of them I think had cancer.
They did not have cancer. My mother had dementia and declined through that disease. And so maybe that's a topic for another day.
Well, I'm sure caregiving is going to come up.
But the caregiving aspect, I've been very much engaged in. As soon as I got out of my own situation, I immediately pivoted and was caregiving for elderly parents.
All right. Casey, you may have something to say here. I don't know.
Oh, it's entirely possible. First to touch on the caregiving thing, because of course we are going to be talking about that. So let's just start with this. But I observed my father go through prostate cancer diagnosis and treatment. And this was back in 91. And it was in the early days of, real adoption, regular adoption of PSA testing for men who were considered age appropriate for prostate cancer. And I think, he heard his name in cancer in the same sentence and took a step that I think most people would have taken, particularly at that time. And his decision was the watch and wait, which was only kind of like an also ran idea at that time. It didn't seem like a solid play for him. So he was like, get it out. And I don't think his outcome was what he had hoped. I never really asked him about it, not as though I really regret that. I think that would have been an uncomfortable conversation, but he already had Parkinson's and so many other things going on. It's like, I knew all about the Parkinson's. I was a team player on Team Parkinson's on Dad, for Dad. So I didn't need to know that. And then I was a hands-on care manager for both of them, starting when I moved to Virginia in 2000, and they died 29 days apart at the end of 2002. My mother-in-law at the time died in between. So all three of them went, boop, 29 days. And that was interesting. And then 5 years later, I got my breast cancer diagnosis. I was patient 0 in my family, breast cancer. And, I was 55. It was my 15th annual mammogram. And it had become sort of okay, fine, I'm doing it. Yeah. And then later, see in a year. Well, not this time. And it turned out I had, ultimately, after all of the data was in from surgery and et cetera, it turned out I had stage 2A hormone positive, both ER and estrogen and progesterone positive breast cancer. But yay for early detection. So I did, I did do chemo, but asked some penetrating questions before making that decision. And that led to me getting a slightly different cocktail than a lot of other people were getting at the time, which I don't think had any impact on outcome. What did have an impact on my outcome long-term was the fact that I lost my insurance at the end of the year of cancer treatment in 2008 and was uninsured for 5 years and could not for the first 2 years, I got a hormone suppression drug that I was supposed to take for 5 years to make sure I didn't have a recurrence. Well, I could only take it for 2. So then fast forward to, the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, we were in the pandemic solidly. And then in a very hold my beer move, I found out that what I thought for months was the recurrence of a back problem that I'd had for decades was not. It was metastatic stage 4 recurrence of breast cancer. Stage 4, by the way, is the only one that kills you, but the common people don't seem to have gotten that message because most of their research dollars goes to early detection still, and only 7% overall of research dollars on breast cancer go into metastatic breast cancer. But moving on. So I've been dealing with that since early February of 2021. I augured into the flight deck hard in June of last year and was in the hospital for 5 days, considering whether or not to continue treatment. And the 5 days in the hospital were so obviously necessary because my system was just completely knocked sideways. All my blood chemistry was like, what, is she alive? The answer was, we're not sure. But after I, augured into the flight deck and they kept me from going over the side, I've gotten much better. I can walk again. I can think again. That was also hard in those months. And I'm back to, sort of working, not as much as before, but a lot for someone with stage 4 cancer, I like to think, especially a person who's almost 70. In a few months, that'll be me. But so my observation about this is that in both cases, both my first round with the early detection win, and then the aftermath, and then also the discovery, diagnosis, and setting a treatment plan for this occurrence, the stage 4 one, the one that will ultimately kill me at some point. The fact that I'm part of, I was, on the first group of people on hashtag BCSM community online, and Alicia Staley was the one of the first people I met on Twitter in 2008 when I joined Twitter when I was doing chemo, because 140 characters is about as good as you get with chemo brain. So, I have a pretty big 360. I'm a journalist. I learned a lot. I'm, also a trained actor. So when I was in medical visits with my parents, being, the person who was there, or, when they were having some sort of a crisis, I could use language that had the clinical team convinced that I was a doctor. But I wouldn't, I if asked, I would say, no, I'm a college dropout, but I am a journalist and I'm a quick study. So I learn all the words and then I can parrot them back. And y'all started talking to me, so you can't stop now. And, that's kind of my, what I've told other people on blast, on a loop ever since. I did write a book about managing managing care, and just the experience of doing that, and what my recommendations are for other people who find themselves with some kind of really big disease. Thank you, Firesign Theater. But, ask questions, work until you get the answers you understand. And if you don't get answers you understand from your clinical team, you need to start exploring to find some other folks who will talk to you in a language that you can understand. So I've been doing that again in stage 4 hashtag Mets party. And so far I'm doing okay. So I will just keep moving in the direction I'm in now. And if the current treatment protocol I'm on stops working, we'll start looking around for other options, clinical trial, whatever. So stay tuned for updates, but that's a very long version of how I got here.
Jeff, good to you. Unmute, Jeff. Well, Jeff.
Unmute.
There we go.
Mine's shorter. On Christmas Eve of 2014, I was diagnosed with metastatic throat cancer. It was a bad lymph node that got biopsied, and it wasn't lymphoma. So the diagnosis was squamous cell carcinoma of the head and neck with an occult primary. It took them 8 weeks almost to find the occult primary. It was nestled up next to my vocal cords in my throat. I was diagnosed here in Charlottesville, but my longtime personal physician, who was in the Department of Medicine at the University of Chicago, said you would be stupid not to come here. The U of C has a spectacular head and neck program. They saved Grant Achat's life, the wizard chef at Alinea. I went there in February of 2015 and had a 6-hour surgery that removed both lesions, and also biopsied a whole bunch of the lymph nodes on both sides of my neck, which were all negative. I stayed in the hospital, supposed to stay 3 days. I ended up staying 8 because they couldn't get the pain control right. I couldn't swallow. They were giving me oral pain meds. It was ridiculous. I lost 17 pounds in the hospital. That contributed directly to both of my hip joints crashing. And when I came home from my stay at the university, I went and took a shower and collapsed into my bed and slept for 17 hours without being awakened. And when I woke up, I had no feeling in my fingers or toes and lost nerve. I lost feeling in 2 of my fingers. So good news, the cancer, like half of cancers are cured by surgery. Mine was one of those. I'm, 6-7 years post-op with no recurrence. I've had a lot of musculoskeletal issues that sort of began coincident with the surgery. I'm really grateful. As a alleged expert in this field, I can tell you that the experience of both being diagnosed with cancer and treating cancer was a wake-up call. I found my interactions with the care system inspirational, and that's a word I don't use very often.
Jen, what are you next?
Hi. So my story is a little bit different than those. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease when I was 19. And so it was between the freshman and sophomore year in college. And I went through chemotherapy and radiation treatment while I was going to school. I just took a really light class load. And it was an interesting experience, of course, at that age. But the doctors were very confident that they would take care of it, that I would be on this protocol, and then, I would go on and live the rest of my life just normally. And I've been very healthy as an adult. I'm 44 now, and I haven't really had a lot of health issues as an adult, but I have had an insane amount of interaction with the medical system because of all of the long-term monitoring. And, making sure that the first 10 years was kind of like, we want to make sure that cancer didn't go back. And then the last 15-ish years has been, we need to make sure that we're checking you for all of the other cancers that you're now in a super high risk category for because of the treatment that you got. And I'm family-wise, I'm in a high risk category for breast cancer to start with. My mother had breast cancer twice. And she's doing great, very healthy now. But that kind of puts me in this like high alert category. So I've been poked and prodded and screened and, all of that more than any one person should be in their life. And I've also had to really learn to push back on the amount of diagnostics and the amount of invasive surgeries that can come as a result of the diagnostics. So that's been a whole new thing, particularly in the last 5 years or so, kind of around turning 40 and then discovering that I had some thyroid issues, which the vast majority of women in their 40s do. That kind of set off a ton of new alarm bells to navigate. So I feel really lucky that things worked out the way that they did. I feel really lucky to have access to the type of health insurance and the type of medical experts that I do. I live in San Francisco, and most of my doctors are at UCSF, and they're amazing. But even as someone who has spent my whole professional career teaching people about the healthcare system, it is so hard to navigate all of that. And to just take in all of the information and figure out what are the best personal choices.
Grace.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience starts with the fact that English is my second language. While I was born here, my family's from Poland and only spoke Polish at home. And then I got to school and we had an issue because I didn't speak English. Got the hang of speaking English, became the go-to child in my family and in my local community and parish for all things healthcare. I would accompany family, friends, members of the community to the doctor. People would bring their notes from the doctor's office and their prescription bottles, and there I'd be with my encyclopedia around 10, 12 years old and my dictionary, writing all these things down because there were no Polish translators at the time. And over the years, I saw many tragic diagnoses: testicular cancer, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, breast cancer, just navigating them with no language, so significant language barriers, many underinsured, not insured, no paid time off, some individuals not here legally. So trying to understand what people's rights are, how do you access healthcare, how do you afford it, and how do you really put it all together when you're here in a country that you're not familiar with a health system you're not familiar with. I couldn't believe when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer on her first mammogram, which I encouraged her to go to. She was 48 at the time, and I was a senior in college. And I couldn't believe that the doctor said there was no cure. My family prized American healthcare versus Europe, and I couldn't understand that there was no cure. How could there be no cure? And that inspired me to go on to grad school. Mom is doing well. She was very aggressively treated. She is disabled now, and I am her primary care partner. And then about 11 years ago, after I defended my thesis, I was diagnosed with advanced lymphoma. I took my medical records and went to Sloan Kettering. And after 4 months at Sloan, after endless tests, blood work, biopsies, scans, images, finally having surgery, I had video assisted thoracic surgery, and then waking up in isolation, which was for potential tuberculosis. It was determined that I was a misdiagnosis and I had a fungal infection that I had acquired on my honeymoon called histoplasmosis, which in a healthy individual only requires monitoring and no treatment. When I was recovering from that, I was very fortunate that I worked at a startup that gave me flexibility to work remotely. And I read an article in the newspaper about patient advocacy as a profession. And at that moment, it was as if my stars aligned. Because had I not gotten my records, had I not had the background I had I not had all the privileges afforded to me, my life would have been very different. So I fully committed to patient advocacy at that point, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Thank you all for because that's a lot of deeply personal stuff there. I know most of you are very outspoken, but nonetheless, I really appreciate you all coming on and saying this. Let me now introduce Adam. So I met Adam when he was one of the star guys.
But we're not going to hear from Jean-Luc.
No, we already did.
We did?
You missed that part.
Oh,
It was so long ago.
He kept it tight because there was so much blather since. Okay, I'll shut up.
He was first.
He was the first one. He was giving his he was caregiver for both parents, including his dad. There's a separate whole podcast about that as well. But we'll get into all of this because
Well, no, I did listen to that podcast today after you shared the link with us. So I guess I felt like I wanted to hear that whole podcast again because it was really good. But that's
the
okay.
whole podcast again. There'll be no time to have anything else for this discussion, which I might be all up for. All right. Okay. So Adam, I met when he was at Microsoft, and then he went through virtually every other digital health company there is between now and then, including some of the big retailers. But before that, he'd been working at the American Cancer Society for many years, and now full circle is a startup, the CEO of Jasper Health, a startup which is doing cancer navigation. And really what I was hoping is that Adam would tell us a little bit briefly about about why he's there and what Jasper's doing. And really I want I'm the last person who should be talking this whole thing, but I'm hoping that some of these issues around the questions are asked, the issues that cancer patients have dealing with their experience before, during, and especially after come up, and that we can use this as a time just to discuss for an hour or so all the things that should be done, and maybe hopefully give some ideas to Adam and some others. Anyway, so Adam, why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Thanks for coming, and I've lined up a hell of a focus group for you at least.
I tell you what, that's the number one thing is hearing the stories and making sure we're building something that's meaningful. I spent the 90s in scrubs and doing clinical stuff. I'm not a doctor. I was a medic in the Army. I was a scrub tech in the OR. So really just kind of working through the whole clinical space. And I had a personal experience with a family member with cancer. My grandpa, who was literally, he passed, but he's literally the toughest person I've ever known in my life. He was in a B-17, 30 missions over Germany, shot down twice. He was a ball turret gunner and his bubble blew out. I mean, literally the toughest person I could ever imagine in my life, and became one of my best friend. And so found out he had skin cancer, was diagnosed with skin cancer. And I thought at the time, I'm like, well, that's nothing. I mean, I didn't know. I just thought, you got skin cancer, maybe you didn't put enough sunscreen on. And then, that's where I kind of started this exploration that it was something. And I really became passionate about prevention, actually, prevention and early detection. And of course, I became also, as I learned about the genetics, learned about family history, I'm constantly looking at myself because I have, lots of scary things that I'm like, oh, do I have it? So I'm constantly now aware of my own potential, risk. But that got me into working with the American Cancer Society. I went there because of the mission, period. I didn't get into digital health because I thought digital health was like a cool thing to get into. I fell into it because I got to the American Cancer Society. And my job was, hey, how do we run prevention and detection initiatives across the country? And I knew we couldn't do it consistently with volunteers only because they can only give so much time. We need standard protocols. So that was my first digital health application, was in like 2001 or 2, was building out a portal for employers so that employees could get prevention and screening information. And then I built a reminder system so employees could get reminded if they hit 50 or 45 now, but 50, get a colorectal cancer screen. So simple things, but in the early 2000s, that was all sort of like, what do you mean we're going to send what's an SMS text message? All of those things were sort of new, and we were just experimenting. But the mission was pure. It was, how do we actually create an intervention that could be done at scale that didn't rely on just grassroots? Grassroots is important. I Relay for Life, I'm huge volunteer and active in it. But really, how do we do it at scale? Fast forward, we built a lot of really neat things on cancer.org. I spent a lot of time doing anthropological research, building out the new cancer.org. And what was fascinating is nothing has really changed as far as needs and things that aren't actually being fulfilled. It's the same things I heard back in 2004 when we were doing all this research. Don't give me more tasks. Don't give me more to-dos. Don't send me lots of websites so I can read lots of information, right? And I felt like when the Jasper opportunity came, I was like, this could be the way where we could be proactive. We can reduce the noise, reduce the clutter. We could actually like automate some of the tasks, automate some of the to-do. So all these things I really wanted to do back in the early 2000s, but never really had that chance. So Jasper, that's what we're building at Jasper today. Just to give you an overview, it's not a sales pitch. It's free for patients, and I'll talk more about that. But essentially, for those who are newly diagnosed, they sign up for Jasper and they use it as basically a digital binder for their information, automate appointments, automate to-dos, and then just surfaces up the information they need specific to their diagnosis and their stage and what they want to see. The goal is to be not a nuisance and not task heavy, but really more like automate the mundane stuff so you can focus on the important things. The other part of Jasper, one thing I learned at cancer.org, and actually all the jobs I've had at Walgreens and others, is you can't just do it with digital. You have to have truly empathetic, coaches and team members that can actually have more of a hybrid experience. So Jasper employs social workers, nurses, dietitians, to focus on the psychosocial help and guidance and navigation for members joining Jasper. I see a question about the patient data. We don't use the patient data for it. It stays in Jasper. It's the patient's data. I led the product stuff for Microsoft Health Vault. Same thing was there. We were very, very careful about patient data use. And so really we focus on that psychosocial side, mental health, medication adherence, financial toxicity, and honestly, diet, nutrition, and honestly, the thing that I hear from almost every single member of Jasper that uses it is, sometimes I don't want to talk to you about anything about cancer. Sometimes I don't want you to, I want to pick up the phone and I want to talk to you about anything but cancer, but I just need to talk to someone. And that's really kind of what I'm trying to build out with the Jasper platform, is the fact that this doesn't have to be about what's going on with you right now. We have some members that are so depressed, they literally respond, you'll get a text reminder, did you take your medication today? No, why, what's the use? And it's in those cases where the goal will be that there's always an ear to talk to, and maybe just matching to a clinical trial using a human, not some bot, but matching to a clinical trial and having that dialogue gives someone hope. And so really, on the what we call the consumer side of Jasper, we kept it free because it's the right thing to do. It's literally, people come on, they use it, they give us feedback, they tell us how to make it better. That's worth it right there. we offer Jasper to employers and health plans. That business model should subsidize the free model. And that's kind of how that, as you said, that's my approach, and I'm sticking to it, kind of thing. Because, to me, you shouldn't pay gate tools that will help automate, help reduce stress, reduce anxiety, and give some type of human connection and empathy during the new diagnosis. I will say one last thing before I shut up. I'm also constantly humbled by what I see on Jasper. Every time I think one thing is the way to go, the members tell me it's not. We built one feature, everyone wants this, and no one used it. But then we have another feature that I'm like, no one's going to use, and then everyone uses it. So it's a humbling experience, because you just don't know, because you're not in the moment. And then, but 12% of the Jasper members are in remission or dealing with cancer as a chronic disease, living with it. And I think you mentioned that. It's like, I'm living my life. I have cancer. This is just now part of my life. And so we built new stuff on top of Jasper to really help folks that are in remission, or those that are just living with it day to day as well. So that's Jasper in a nutshell. I'm also, my wife is a caregiver for her mother, who has really late stage dementia and Alzheimer's. I have that bookshelf right there. I have on the very top probably 7 binders this thick, full of EOBs and medication information, all that kind of stuff. So my goal is ultimately, can we find a way of getting rid of the binder? I call it binderitis. Can we get rid of the binders and just automate some of this stuff? And you should be able to just search for it. Again, simple things. This is not like AI magical stuff in the cloud's going to predict, the future. I may have a flux capacitor, doesn't mean I'm going to build something that's going to go to the future. This is simple stuff. Can we just make it a little bit easier? And that's what we're doing at Jasper.
Thank you, Adam. So let me open it up, and I should be the last person to talk. Well, the last person I should talk the least here. Collectively, what are the biggest issues just living with cancer and the experience of caregiving or living with cancer that need that kind of little help? What do you mean? Perhaps Grace or Joe or Jane or anyone can chime in here, but I'd love to get that conversation going about what should Adam be doing, and how do we spread that kind of, is that the kind of thing we need to do?
Yeah. So
I see Grace, I see Rosemarie, I see Casey. Please dive in.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is the crippling, what I call patient administrative burden. So we have a good handle on physician burden and burnout. No one is measuring and really investigating the hours that are lost on the phone, of work time, of sleep, in faxing and dialing and searching and Googling. You're basically reinventing the wheel every single day to try to get the care that you need. And there's just too many barriers. And that's when you're in a good place, let alone when you don't have access to insurance, you don't have a private office to take a phone call, you don't have childcare, you don't have transportation, and the whole plethora of different impacts of social determinants of health that really make it survival mode every single day. So I think when I look at digital health, and what the future is, it's the companies that are going to really reduce patient administrative burden, and the policies that are going to support that, and the reimbursement frameworks that are going to elevate that experience by supporting those new technologies coming in.
Yeah, I'll jump in with sort of a two-pronged, ask here. Is I'm curious about what your approach, your company's approach is to managing the data flows through your patient-facing app, and the fact that I'm one of those people who goes on high alert if someone says, "Oh, it's free." Oh, then that means I'm the product. So I'm curious what the data, if there's any de-aggregation, de-identification, and whatever, just curious. And then I will echo
I would say that's a great question. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
well, and then moving on, because I'm not going to get stuck there. But anyway, everything Grace said about the administrative burden is huge. And I too have a binder, although I have, thanks Google Drive, and paying for extra storage, I have everything available to me digitally wherever the heck I am, as long as I have either my phone or my desktop and obviously an internet connection. But I'm a city girl, so that tends to be me most days. And, but still, I had to set that up. And I will, be the first one to admit that I'm very strange in the level to which I've taken this. And to the point where I even have a meds list in a document on Google Drive, where if somebody says, well, let's go over your medications, how about you just use this? And I hand them the phone because, if they, it's just easier. And, but then it's sort of the other piece that keeps nagging at me is that I see these arguments, and I'm often part of them online a lot, about when should a person known as a patient in this setting get the information about what their diagnosis is, what their, what the latest scans showed, et cetera. Now, I get that there are people and that their wishes, preferences should be honored, that they get that information from a clinical professional so that that person can interpret for them what this usually very dense document says. But because I speak radiologist and pathologist, because I too have journal credits, particularly in the Journal of the College of the American College of Radiology, I found out through the patient portal that I had metastatic activity in my spine. That was the first time I saw anything about, well, no, it's not your back problem, dear. I'm like, okay, then. And I was okay with that, but I recognize that a lot of people aren't. However, can't that somehow get baked into the early adoption of a new clinical relationship, whatever, that it's like, what are your communication preferences? And drill in on that to say, okay, I want everything the same time the doctor gets it. I'm good with that. No, and these are just 2 checkboxes. It's not 5 or 12, 2. I want it when the doctor gets it. I want my doctor to tell me. And then that cues, well, obviously this is an, epic Cerner la 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 problem, which, yeah, good luck. But anyway, if enough of y'all ask, maybe it'll happen. But that, at least then the person who's the person who's in the clinical setting wearing the stethoscope knows what to do. And the person on the receiving end of the information feels as though they're going to get the information they want in a fashion that is important to them and not just to the system. So.
Awesome. So let me take the first one on data. So we don't do the degradation. We're not a pharma business model. And let me tell you the reason why, and it'll make more sense. Jasper actually, when it was first incubated, before I came on board, it was actually an e-commerce model. And let me tell you what I mean by that is really the idea was everyone needs something when they're newly diagnosed. So maybe everyone could buy something for a help list. A great idea, truly helpful, kind of like a registry concept. But I didn't think that was going to be the thing that was really going to help people navigate as much as connecting patients to the broader healthcare system. So when I joined, I removed all the e-commerce pieces of Jasper. And it actually also helped with our nonprofit partners. We have like 30 plus nonprofit partners that partner with Jasper to provide information on resources locally. They felt it was kind of odd to have like products in a marketplace and, so you want me to send people so they could buy your product, so we gutted all that out like right away. So then I was left with a question. Do I shut all that down because that was an old business model, and just focus on this B2B model where I sell to health plans and health systems? And I couldn't do it because it wasn't the right thing to do. And I literally said, I can't. People are using it today. We had over, at that time, 3,500 members. And I'm like, they're using it. It's helping them. we're keeping it free. So I get that question a lot, like, why don't you charge for it? I'm not going to do it. Now, the one thing I will say is we'll test out this idea. If someone wants like a very high touch thing, maybe a loved one can sponsor sort of a higher touch, one-on-one experience or something like that. But the base thing will always be free because I refuse, I'll go to my grave before I cut off people from a free resource that they're actually using and it's helping them. That's the story as to why Jasper is free and why I don't care about, the business model on that. If I do my job on working with health plans and health systems and employers, this should be just like the right thing to do, period, anyways. So that's why we're focused over here. On your next one on communication preferences, I love that idea. I don't have actually a response other than I love the idea and definitely can see where, back in the day, people were worried about genetics and genetic data, probably 2011 or 12. People shouldn't have access to that because they could go do something. And then they put genetic counselors and stuff into that flow. I think the question is can we leverage folks, that may not be as educated? Can we find a way to make it so that if they're given information, it's not just in a vacuum without some sort of guidance? But I will say, you also touched on something that I'm super passionate about. It actually came from our patient advocate that is an advisor to Jasper since before I was there, Amy Lowe, and she was on a webinar about a week or two ago. And the thing that hit home to me, and something I'm super passionate about, is she said, the questions I didn't know I should have asked, because she had, and you kind of mentioned this as well, she had all of these amazing resources around her. And she's like, everyone doesn't have, all these, amazing doctors and all this other guidance. I wish, she told a story about going into one of her treatments, and all this is public because it was on the webinar last week. And she sat down with her oncologist and a cardio, I think a cardiothoracic surgeon friend of hers told her, well, why wouldn't you try this type of radiation therapy? Because you're a perfect fit for it. So she went and talked to her oncologist and said, well, why wouldn't I try this? It sounds like this would actually work with my life better than what you're telling me to do, a surgical procedure. And she said, the oncologist sat there and said, yeah, actually that would work. That would work. You're a perfect candidate for that. And it just stuck in my head, and it's in every single presentation, because it's just like, it's almost like branded into my brain. Like, what if she didn't ask that question? And so part of Jasper has to be, how do we share the knowledge, the tribal knowledge, right, backwards, right? Like, I just want a feature that says, here's the 5 things I wish I would have asked. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that alone, it would make my year if we could just do that. And so so I think it just goes to, I'm sorry, I'm passionate about this because I'm actually really passionate about this. The specific thing is sharing the wisdom to those who are newly diagnosed, who just heard the bombshell, you have cancer. 1, it's not like, it's not that sentence. 2, here's the things you should ask, because I wish I would have asked. And 3, there's hope. So those are, to your point, some of the things that we're working on in Jasper right now. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, as somebody who followed the Health 2.0 thing for a long time after having met Matthew, the whole patients like me idea, the idea that there are communities that form around this stuff. And one of the things that digital can do great is assemble communities and let them talk to one another. And I think that idea of learning from people that have been where you are now and survived and are stronger because of it is like super important. The other thing I wanted to say is that, the open-endedness of a cancer diagnosis is one of the things that really kind of just sort of yawns. And it's like looking down the barrel of a large cannon. One of the things that really helped me not panic was my community ENT handing me, it was 7 or 8 pages worth of paper, the National Comprehensive Cancer Center guidelines for my diagnosis. So here's the pathway that the last 10,000 people that were diagnosed with metastatic throat cancer followed, and here's what happened to them. That was an enormously helpful thing. And it's like, it's like a decision tree. The idea of handing somebody a bunch of paper is just ridiculous in 2022. But the idea that, you can get access to this stuff, you can navigate in it, you can, like splash around and find stuff and, kind of narrow down some of the threatening uncertainty. I'm not sure if that's built into your model or not, but it ought to be.
I just real quick response, because then I will say that is built into the model. I think the one thing we're trying to do, and we may be wrong on it, honestly, is we try to distill the content down to be very bite-sized, but there may be instances where people want not bite-sized because they really want to dive into it. We built this thing called a nudge engine. Essentially, is when you onboard into on Jasper, you kind of say, I'm a patient, I'm a caregiver, I'm in remission, and then your diagnosis and stage. Our goal would be that 3 things may pop up and say, this is, what other people have read that helped them. And maybe it's that the journal, watch a movie tonight to get your mind off it. It's going to go from really complex things to really super simple things like take a walk. The
one other thing I wanted to say is that, the last time I looked, there were 17 million cancer survivors in the country. That's like 5% of the US population. And there's a tremendous amount of learning. There's a tremendous amount of hope. There's a tremendous amount of inspiration in their experiences, that trying to figure out a way to feed that back into the crazy time where you're looking down the gun barrel, I think is also just really, really super helpful. And, a lot of those folks won't want to talk about it, but I strongly suspect many of them do.
I totally agree. One of the first digital health products, I didn't create it. A gentleman by the name of Neil Sofian created it. So I want to make sure I give him credit. But I took it over from Neil in early 2000s, called the Cancer Survivors Network. And it was a social network just for cancer survivors. And I rebuilt that into cancer.org. It's still active today. It's like 20 years, probably 20 years old, 22 years old. But there are that is a vibrant community for cancer survivors to talk.
Rosemarie.
Great. I had several thoughts. One reminds me, I think June 1st is Cancer Survivor Day. And I know where I was treated has a wonderful community gathering, still virtual at this point, but where they do all kinds of stuff around wellness with the cancer survivor lens. And it's such a great gathering and community builder, and to remind you that you're not alone. And even if you're past it, there can still be issues you're confronting because of having had, as you said, that bombshell come into your life. I'm really struck by, in my experience, the incredible benefit of having a buddy, which I am now trying to somewhat be for a dear friend of mine who has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I knew that I was too emotional, and my husband was probably going to be too emotional in that first meeting with the doctor who had given me the call that I had cancer. And we came in that day, and I brought a friend who I knew would be able to stay kind of just a little removed, cared, but would be able to take the notes and ask the questions. And in fact, it was because of her question that, hey, I'd had the mammogram, but maybe I should have an MRI. Never would have occurred to me. And then they approved it. And it led to a different kind of surgery. I ended up having a full mastectomy, not a delightful thing to have, but it got me closer to 100% guarantee. And that was only because I'd had the MRI, which is not found in the mammogram. Never would have thought to ask that. It was my friend who did, because she was just keeping a calm, collected head. So when I think of your tools, having them accessible to those buddies in our lives who are helping us navigate is incredibly empowering. And I think of the tool we use a lot, Caring Bridge, where, my dear friend can give her update on her cancer story, or somebody else could do it for her. And then all the people who care can be there, but not overburden that person who's going through it. And then you can fan out and have to-dos. So I'm thinking, if you are able to then binderize, electronically certain information, if you're anointed as one of those official buddies, maybe you can help manage some of those pieces that become overwhelming for the actual patient. So I just see like really good things that are going on that you could keep pulling together. PanCan for the pancreatic cancer community is an amazing resource. And I don't know if you're linked up with them, but we just did a walk fundraiser for them.
Yeah.
They're amazing. So those are just a few thoughts. Caring Bridge, PanCan, Buddies, Empower, any of them, connect that. And then there's amazing books out there that survivors have written. And I just finished one by Kate Bowler, who's at Duke, who had a lot of tips for people as to like what to say or not to say to people who are, going through cancer treatment.
Perfect. If I can cover a couple of those, I know we got to move quickly, and Matt's like, Adam, but I do want to at least address a couple of them. One, I'm a huge, so we have built-in caregiver support in Jasper, so that you can actually add a buddy, and it has permissions, because one thing I learned at Health Vault and Healthy Circles is we need to make sure you may not want to share everything with everyone. So we built a simple permission framework into that. We also partnered with Immerman Angels. If you ever heard of that, essentially it's a buddy system for, it's a nonprofit. So when they match you up with someone who basically had the same diagnosis, same stage, and becomes your mentor. So when you log into Jasper, you'll get a nudge that says, would you like to be matched up with Immerman Angels, which I think our first nudge, we literally blew it out of the water as far as volume. So I'm a big supporter of them. The last thing I would say, and this is for everyone, we're right now about to integrate the ability to, this will be a question. Would you recommend it, or would you use it? The ability to record your doctor meetings and have machine learning be able to pull out the text and keywords, working with a partner called The Bridge, to be able to basically, when you hear that, you're going to hear something at that meeting, you start recording it, and then you can go back later, or you could share it with your caregiver, and you can dialogue about what just happened in that meeting. So I don't know if that's something that sounds interesting to folks, but we're literally about ready to kick off a partnership with them, and I would love your all's thoughts.
I'll just quick response. I could never write down stuff as fast as was needed, and all the words, my eyes glaze over, or ears, but whatever it is, when they're, so to be able to rewind literally would have been amazing. I'm worried that doctors would feel like somehow be used against them, but
I know that's
all I know is I could not keep up. And then when you add in the emotions of it, and you're just like literally not really focusing, it would be invaluable, I think.
I am going to jump in with something. I have to say that a big unmet need that I see is that while connecting to hope and support is important, there's not enough support for those who do have a terminal diagnosis, who there is no more treatment, there are no more clinical trials, that they want to plan funerals. They can't have conversations with their loved ones. What do they tell their children? How do you bring peace and dignity into end of life care? And that's something that a space that I work in a lot, and hospice falls short all the time. Even if you're well insured, even if you have supplemental plans, there's never enough that's done when someone is actively dying. And I hope that we see a change in that, because until you've walked that path, you see all the different things that you wish were there, but are just not at people's fingertips.
Another one of those learnings for me was literally what you just said. It's hard to think about how do you actually even approach that, right? But you must. And we actually have seen a lot of requests for it. Our clinical team has already built out modules specifically for end-of-life planning, palliative care. I'm not going to say we have a comprehensive capability yet, because we just started this, I think, the last 7 to 8 weeks, building out these modules. And we're still trying to figure out, to me, it's more going to be the human interaction than a digital solution, because it's so sensitive, right? I mean, for a digital health person, I think I've gone so away. I mean, Matt's known me forever.
15 years of your life.
15 years,
Stop
right? And I'm all about digital. In this space, I'm not all about digital, frankly. And as a matter of fact, the more I get into it, the less digital I get. And so I think some of it's going to require a lot more. I think it's like empathy, right? We want to scale empathy, is what I always say. That means humans. That means actual caring people that actually want to have an ear. And so I think that is something that we're working on, but I think it's how we're going to deploy it. It's going to be more human than digital.
So I think we're going to Jen, and then Jeff has to go. But so let's do that order, and then we'll get. Then I hope at some point I want to get to JL and talk a little bit about, who's been quiet for a while, talk about the money side of this, both from the system side and from the individual side. But Jen.
I think something that we've touched on a little bit that's interesting is just the speed at which the doctors are even up to speed on the latest treatments and the latest research and so forth. And one of the issues with people who are my age who had cancer treatments when we were young is that the amount of radiation and the amount of chemotherapy was so much larger than what someone would get today. And that's caused a lot of long-term impacts. But even in the more recent, like 5 to 10 years, the reconstructive surgery that my mom had after her most recent breast cancer treatment, they don't do it anymore, and her recovery from that surgery was brutal, and they don't do it anymore. But at that moment, her doctor was 100% confident that this was, exactly what she needed, and it changes really fast. So I think there's an element of how can that scaling of the support around the patient and around their caregivers, how does that help keep up with what is the most current? That's something that I am frustrated by in my own ongoing diagnostic journey as well.
One thing that I don't have an answer for that, other than the one thing I have seen is a lot of these amazing cancer centers like MSK starting to figure out how can they democratize their expertise across the country. A lot of them are doing it at City of Hope. And that's one vehicle digital can help in, right? Is as these best practices come out, as peers start looking. I mean, here, look at LinkedIn. You can share information on LinkedIn instantly with 500 plus contacts that go out to millions, right? We should have the same thing for best practices, and it shouldn't take an in-person, learning educational credits session at an annual conference to share that best practices. I do know a couple companies that are even starting peer-to-peer oncologist social networks, so they can share best practices with each other. To me, a LinkedIn for oncologists that share best practices, that's way more better money spent than anything else. Yeah.
It's even sometimes within the same health system, doctors don't know what's available in other parts. It was actually,
and they're busy. I mean, to be fair, I mean, I talk to a lot of oncologists that are, when we talk to them about Jasper and the psychosocial side, the mental health, and we can help with diet and nutrition, some of the oncologists are like, thank goodness, because I literally have no time. I am going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And I had one head of oncology tell me, I just got out of a meeting getting yelled at because I haven't talked to the person I just gave a diagnosis to in 2 weeks. And all of the things, I gave her a list of 7 phone numbers to call if she needs anything for resources wise. Yeah. Right. I mean, so I get it. It's super busy, but that gap has to be filled.
Yep.
So we're about to lose Jeff. So for a final word from Jeff before we go on to the rest of the conversation, but and I don't know, Jeff, how much you think and I want to introduce a topic which we haven't got into yet, which is that your old stomping grounds, Adam, the American Cancer Society, talked about the financial toxicity of cancer, and we've heard a lot about that. And then something that JL introduced on the previous conversation was, I think JL said he saved United Healthcare $1 million when his father, by managing his father. So I don't know, but I'm kind of always thinking about how does this stuff connect into the real world where, cancer is this big business, right? For oncology. So anyway, Jeff, I don't know if you have a final comment before we
Yeah, I mean,
I
I just wanted to say, Adam, I found your comments and your approach to this refreshingly non-commercial. I know a lot of digital health companies have begun with an episode where someone saw an unmet need and said, I can really use this digital tool set to meet that unmet need. But there's a tremendous amount of thoughtless tech bro tourism in this space. And I didn't detect a shred of it in your remarks or your business model. It was really refreshing.
Well, thank you. It comes from all the gray hair of, I'm past that age of being a tech bro, I think. I'm just trying to do what I originally started out to do.
The gray hair really helps. I think there's a generational issue here, frankly. I think someone who's had a cancer diagnosis is a different person than someone that hasn't, and that really hasn't faced significant health problems. And you take things with a kind of a different level of seriousness when you hear about serious illness. And I think a lot of the people that are out there blowing and going and doing $100 million deals have never gotten sick.
Cancer is not, first of all, I've always, and this is controversial maybe for some, but I always believe if you're going to run a digital health company, you should probably have at one point taken care of patients.
Yep.
I'm not a doctor, but I was a medic. I was in the OR. And I started in healthcare in a non-digital space in the 1990s because I wanted to be in healthcare. And I just happened to, my evolution is this happened and then this happened. And then I found myself into this digital space. It wasn't cool. It wasn't hip back then. And it wasn't some sort of like gold rush of funding coming in. We just did stuff and we tried to scale it with these digital tools. I think at Jasper, we hire a lot of folks that are like me, folks that have seen things not work, and then literally know that, we're on this earth for a very short amount of time. Make the impact you can make while you can.
Yep. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. We're going to keep going with we'll lose you. We'll keep going with the rest of the gang. JL, I want to go to you. I want to try and steer the conversation if you're okay with it. Well, bring up what you like. It's been quiet for a long time, but so some of these issues around like the money and the finance side.
Well, a couple of things. So a couple of things I wanted to respond to. So I think first, Rosemarie was hitting, I think, on a very important point that in all this community knowledge, I think that there's a lot of structure that you can create from it. So things like to-dos and checklists and flowcharts and just things that help patients understand, like, this is what the community has learned. And based on what we've learned, like, this is stuff that we can walk you through so that you're better prepared to go through the experience that you're going to go through. And I think that that's very important. And certainly when I was working with my parents and taking care of my parents, I felt like I was every day reinventing the wheel, like every day doing something that I know that somebody else had done before, somebody had learned before, and they weren't necessarily a doctor, it could have been a nurse, another caregiver, somebody else. And I think that that is very, very important to make that kind of knowledge more structured and more available. And obviously, if you're a startup and you're thinking of IP, those are very useful things, I think, to build. And by the way, Adam, I run an addiction treatment company, and that's actually a very big part of what we do is, we help families that are often devastated, but devastated in a different way, right? Rather than a cancer diagnosis, there's an addiction diagnosis that is destroying the family. And many of the things that you're talking about are actually very similar to what we deal with again. And what we find is that while every addiction is different, and while every cancer is different, there's commonality in terms of the treatment path. And I think that there's a lot that you can capture that you can share that would be very useful. So I think that's one thing I'd say. Another thing I just wanted to follow up on with, Grace had alluded to this before. To me, when I was sitting in my parents' house in New Jersey, the thing that struck me the most was just the absolute cacophony of like messages coming from different people. Like, so the surgeon's office is calling and we're getting appointment reminders. And then there's like the oncologist, and then there's the physical therapist, and there's the specialty pharmacy. And oh, by the way, here's the insurance company. And there's like so many things that are coming at a patient, many of them of no significance, of no value, right? Like here's an EOB that says, well, you actually may owe us $50,000, but you really don't owe us $50,000, you know? And that is a very frightening thing for somebody who is already dealing with their mortality, dealing with end of life, often dealing with very complicated family issues that come out of a cancer diagnosis. So again, I think, you know, I don't know how you solve that problem, but being able, what I did for my parents, I was like the sentry at the door. And I was like, if you want to talk to either of these people, you're going to have to go through me, and you're going to have to give me a damn good reason for why you want to get an input from either of these people. So I think, you know, again, being able to do that, I think is very important. Matthew, in terms of the cost part. So Adam, if you get a chance, please listen to my podcast. But the point that I make in my podcast is because I was a physician, you know, so trained at the highest level, I was an internal medicine physician, and I really understood what was going on with my dad as a patient and what was going on with his treatment. I was really able to manage his care effectively so that we stayed in the optimal environment, which was his big house in New Jersey, surrounded by his family members, around all the things that he knew and loved, and kept him out of the emergency room and out of the hospital. And what Matthew is alluding to here is that I've said on many occasions that if it weren't for me, my dad would have probably incurred another $1 million in care. And United Healthcare never sent me a check, never sent me a thank you letter, never sent me anything. They didn't even know that I was there doing that. But if you were to look at my dad and look at his diagnosis, he was totally an outlier in terms of how much cost went into his care. And he had a much better outcome, lasted a much longer time because of it. So I think that, you know, I don't know, again, I think this is beyond your purview as a company, but I'm very much a believer that for the sickest, most high intensity sick patients, sometimes like giving them a doctor and letting that doctor be available to them, and it could be a nurse practitioner, it could be somebody else, can really save a lot of money. So I think as you think about business models, you know, I continue to believe that the business model opportunity is taking cost out of what is clearly the most expensive care that somebody can get, right? Cancer care is off the charts expensive. And if you can figure out ways to keep people out of high cost environments, keep them at home rather than the hospital, I think that there's a business model to be made there. And then last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, the peer-to-peer oncology company that you talked about, my friend Doug Mursky is at that company, and I've spent many hours talking to Doug about their business model. They're another redesigned health company as well. So
okay, yeah, you know what I was talking about, Ben.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I talked to Doug about that, and I'm like, brilliant. You know, he actually called and said, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, absolutely. We need a link. That's why I got the LinkedIn for oncologists. But to your point too, also take the cost out of care. A couple of things. One that you said that really resonate with me. One, we can actually do a lot with patient-reported outcomes to see side effects and issues way ahead of time. And that's one thing, you know, when people look at Jasper, like how do you actually save money? If we could just say red, yellow, green, the members in red are, you know, bound to go into the emergency room that leads to an inpatient acute visit if we don't do something right away. Let's make an intervention happen right now. That's really the premise behind our B2B model. But what you described, to me, it really is value-based care. And I don't mean it just in the global sense, in the structural sense. You were literally delivering value-based care, right? I mean, the essence of it. And I think that's what we want to do from Jasper is create a framework to actually allow providers and health systems to deliver value-based care, because then saving that $1 million actually does mean something, right? And if you can document it with KPIs, which is what we're building in our value-based care analytics system, to say, hey, listen, we just saved you X. We should, you know, the providers should get X of this, right? That's kind of the future, I think, where things are going, is if you could deliver a better experience, if you could deliver more value at true human value in care, and reduce the costs, then the provider should be compensated for it.
Mm-hmm.
And last thing I'd say is we think of addiction the same way you think about cancer. It is not a technology. Technology will not solve the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Technology facilitates the deployment of empathic people, right?
Yep.
And facilitates
Exactly.
getting human beings to meet face to face or over video with somebody who has a problem. The technology is just floating underneath to make that efficient and effective.
Right. It should automate the mundane so that
Yes.
it gives you more time to deliver empathetic care with humans. That's really what
Yes.
we should be doing. If we could just do that, it may not sound like magical and API algorithm in the sky. If we could just do that alone, that's a big win.
Grace, we're about to lose you to girls softball, I know, but you've been doing on a sort of non-scaled basis a lot of what Adam's been talking about over the lot. We've been talking about the last hour and 10 minutes. So perhaps you give me a sense about where, what you think about how to scale your empathy. How do we scale Grace's as well as scaling JL's?
Well, I have to say that the most precious thing that we all have is time. So if you want to bring value, to the person living with cancer, how do they want to spend their time? Going to what JL said, preventing people from going to the emergency room. Well, that means paying attention to treatment-related side effects and addressing them quickly, and addressing patient administrative burden. Think about the care partner that maybe is there trying to juggle and is on the phone all day, every day at work. That's productivity, time lost at work. So I think looking through the currency of time for everyone is really important. Insurance denials cripple individuals living with cancer and families trying to coordinate that care. It is a known fact that third-party reviewers for payers almost purposely decline and deny gold standards of care that are prescribed by board-certified physicians who practice at cancer centers of excellence, which require peer-to-peer calls, which delay care unnecessarily, which delay imaging, which delay access to treatment. And again, going back to time, when you're living with cancer, an advanced cancer and aggressive cancer, you don't have that luxury of time. So I think that's another thing. I think I would end on reducing, if not eliminating, unnecessary patient administrative burden, which trickles onto the care partner and the family trying to do all of this, and then reducing the burdens and barriers that people face because of unnecessary denials of care that has been prescribed by physicians.
I love time as currency. I think that it is in so many ways, right? In so many ways. The one thing I will say on this that you touched on and everyone has touched on is what we've realized. We knew this at the American Cancer Society as well. So it's happened forever. There's not enough support for the actual caregiver. Mm-hmm. So we started building in okay, what about mental health and diet and nutrition and all that psychosocial support for the actual caregiver? We have, I think, almost now 2,000, 3,000, maybe 4,000 caregivers on Jasper today. And so some of our now calls to our social workers are actually from caregivers that just want to decompress. So I think it's not a formalized part of the product yet, but I think the future is also how do we actually provide more help for the caregiver from a mental health perspective? It's a big, we all know this, but maybe they don't when there's a new diagnosis and they've never dealt with it before. They may have no idea what's coming, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, kudos to you. And I wanted to wish you luck and I do need to drop. So wonderful conversation, everyone.
Thanks, Grace. Good luck with the girls softball. And
Thank you.
We'll get going. So Jen, you wanted to dive in on the costing again. So we have about another 15 minutes.
Yeah. So I don't know that I have saved the insurance company $1 million yet, but I have certainly saved probably 100,000 or more by not being super, super aggressive with diagnostic surgeries. And I'm unique, but there's a ton of people that are living with chronic diseases or, post-cancer treatment that require a lot of follow-up. And there's a tremendous amount of fear around the potential of getting cancer again. And I think in my own experience, a big part of what I have had to do so that I'm not just, constantly in anxiety about that possibility is have a totally different frame of mind around that. But I've noticed with a lot of my practitioners, and a lot of the doctors that I've interacted with over the years, they assume that I will go to any length to prove that I do not have cancer in this moment, if there is the teeniest chance that there's something going on that might be cancer. So it's whether it's in a breast MRI or a mammogram or a thyroid scan or anything like this. I've said no to probably 5 or 6 diagnostic surgeries and just said, let's just wait. Let's just give it 3 months or 6 months and see what happens, whether or not I actually need to have a surgery to to do another biopsy on my thyroid. That's probably not going to give us more information. So I think there's an element there of just that tremendous fear we have in our society around cancer, that I don't know that it always leads to the best decisions for the short term or the long term. And I'm certain that it adds just an incredible amount of additional cost into the system, and not to mention painful surgeries that have side effects and so forth.
I wonder if that also goes back to the couple of things. One, the co-pilot, someone being with you to help be an advocate for you, and then 2, like the questions I wish I would have asked, right? Like, no, this actually is what I know. Someone asked this question, same diagnosis, same stage. It worked for them. Why not me? And another thing Amy Lowe, our patient advocate on Jasper, said is every time her meeting would be over, her appointment, the oncologist would say, well, do you have any more questions? Like that was actually the closing of the meeting. That there wasn't actually going to, and her trick was, and what she tells everyone is, I just start asking questions to a point where then they have to actually say, I need to go to my, because she said, we have to be advocates for ourselves. Yeah, I have more questions. Have you seen this before? Is that what you've done before? What about this? And I think, it's just, to your point, it can't just be, here's what we have for you. This is what, this is, and take it, right? We have to be, and so how can we actually provide more tools that empowers people to say, I still go back to that sort of tribal wisdom, go back and say, look, this has worked for so many, it's the same type of as me. Why can't we do this? Tell me why, right?
So Adam, let me ask you, and then let's go to the crowd. There are 2 things which really struck me in this conversation. One is that, I remember in 1996, I had a meeting when I was at Institute for the Future, and I brought one of the first people, one of the first online sort of cancer, it might have been ACOR, might have been one of those Gilles Friedman's early work, but one of the first online conversations. We've had 20, nearly on the way to 30 years now, people talking to each other online about this stuff. And yes, we've had patients like me and other efforts. We haven't really done a great job in capturing, decades of accumulated knowledge. We're sitting here with a bunch of patient leaders, but they haven't really done an amazing job about formulating that and making it, distributing it and democratizing. That's one thing. And then the second related question is, how are we going to get a Jasper Health or a Buddy or the stuff we're talking about to everybody? Because my impression, I don't know the numbers here, is that a relatively small number of patients have this level of advocacy. Maybe I'm wrong, but that the standard oncology complex, is onto the next thing. It doesn't deal with this aspect of cancer care. So maybe the group can talk about those 2 things for the. I know we have 10 minutes left, but Casey, why don't you dive in then, Adam?
Yeah, I'll make the observation that because I was an early adopter of all things tech, sending my first instant message in 1980 and having a computer in my house in 1983, and using tech as a broadcast engineer, I'm an OG. But the ability to communicate with people across all kinds of time zones or human networks about things that matter to you, particularly health-wise, is invaluable. and should be welcomed by the medical industrial complex, and is to a degree. But I still find a level of concern, consternation, I guess I'd put it. If a patient shows up with information that surprises the doctor that they have it, that should not happen in 2022. Hello, internet. It's like, really? And just that leads, that's into the administrative burden piece. Like, excuse me, what, are we supposed to only have binders? I'm sorry, what? And, I lived through this with my parents in my first go round, which was over many years. And I ended up in bankruptcy because I had to take, it wasn't really a career break, but it kind of was, because, there's a long story about it that I'm not going to tell here, but my bankruptcy was discharged 5 days before my dad died. So at least I got out from under a whole bunch of problems that were looming, but it did make the next, many years, really until today, section of my life interesting, and also put me in the way of not being insured for 5 years after cancer treatment. But, I'm also just ridiculously delighted that I didn't fall for the Medicare Advantage play, because I'm on original Medicare, with a really good D. Well, if there is such a thing, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. And I also have a pretty good supplement. When I was in the hospital for 5 days last year, I was ready for a bill. Didn't get one. It was wild. And I was grateful. But the financial burden that is part of this whole game, and then the administrative burden on patients, I think causes crappy outcomes in a lot of ways, because you end up with a lot of extra mental and emotional impacts on your mental and emotional health that don't really help you get to a full state of recovery. And, I'm pretty resilient, but I know that most people are nowhere near as able to take a punch and get back up as I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't assume that everybody's going to be like me. I assume that I'm weird, and that's been proven out over time.
Mm-hmm.
But, I worry about people who end up in the cancer camp and have to navigate this stuff, sometimes alone. For me, that's a preference. It's like, no, please don't confuse me. I will get information from other people. I will go to my network and ask questions, particularly BCSM, about, issues I'm having with meds or, whatever. But for the most part, I'm pretty good at managing my care myself now. But I do have an advance directive. I do have a POA. I was like, I've got all this because, walking my parents through that situation for years back in the late 90s into the early aughts, it was like, oh yeah, lesson learned. Do not do. And my parents had POAs, and, so thank you. They taught me about this. But, anyway, that's the end of my little screed.
Adam, can I ask you about responding to the case? You're also asking about spreading this, because it sounds to me, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds to me as though we're now in year, whether it's 15 or 25 of the sort of the digital health patient movement, and most people don't have Jasper Care wouldn't be being built now if everyone already had it. So how do we get this into the system?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I was going to mention off your comment. I mean, it has been a long time, right? And one of the things that I think we have to figure out is we have to get these big organizations, big institutions to really become less and less afraid of user-generated content. I can't tell you how many times these ideas have come up before with really, really big companies. I'm not going to name any of them, but I will say they've come up. And oftentimes it's, what if someone comments about X and we're liable for it? I've dealt with that for 15 years now. Some organizations have gotten closer to being able to adopt it, which then, these organizations are going to be around forever or for a long time. that starts to create institutional record, right? And I'm afraid of a lot of the technology companies that have come into health, gone out of health, come into health, come out of health. I get no comments, but on who. But think about it, right? You have the promise of a longitudinal health record for 5 years. I call it the 5-year fad. A 5-year fad of we're going to launch a big health group initiative. We're going to do all this, and you're going to have your information here, and then we're closing down. Sorry, right? Because there wasn't a business model around it. I think the future is, how do we put some of these things into things that already have the business models, so that they can actually have a longitudinal sort of story or record that sticks around. And it's not a 5-year exploration or innovation initiative. I also, for me, working with the multiple stakeholders, I think one of the things I wrote down was our goal is to be sort of an orchestration engine between, specialty, pharmacy, health plans, health systems, employers, so that, but really that the member, the patient, and the caregiver own their record, and they can connect to anyone they want. But if they disconnect, they still have their record. And I think I've always believed that model, but it's really making sure that we can orchestrate all the stakeholders together as much as possible in a seamless way. And I think that could help as well, because then there's actually business models to support it, getting away from I want to launch a PHR, and which we all know, and I don't know a lot of PHR business models that I've seen succeed over the last 15, 20 years. It has to have some sort of return on investment that makes it sustainable, so that those patients can keep that record, from here on out.
But Adam, is the end game for Jasper, and you think for other navigators and folks, is essentially what JL was talking about. If you do a better job helping the patient manage themselves, they'll actually spend less money, and therefore the health plans and the employers will.
Yeah. I think it's that's almost being the co-pilot with the patient throughout the experience. If something starts coming up that we see early, can we get some help right away? And if so, can we reduce them going to the emergency room, right? I mean, if you can't afford the medication, and there's tons of copay assistance and foundations out there that can help you, but you don't even know what that means. This is crazy in my mind, that the world exists where we had a member join because it was free, and she had a free phone, an Android phone from a local community program. She joined, and after about a week of talking to our oncology social worker, the oncology social worker says, well, in your location, Medicaid should be paying for this. And she said, what's Medicaid? She knew.
Oh.
We can't just assume people even know what Medicaid is, right? I mean, that blew my mind. She was living in a car and had an Android phone, couldn't get meds because she had taken a street drug because of pain. I mean, all of these things, I think that the future of Jasper is just, can we help people along, experience something, or when they hit the bombshell, not assume that they know what to do next, or even what the heck that bombshell is, right? And that's where we want. I think we can save money that way for payers. I think we can save friction for health systems. I think we can increase medication adherence for the patient. I mean, all these things, simply by making sure that we don't assume that the member knows everything, or even something about what they've just been told. I mean, again, I think some of the best business models are the most simple ones. This isn't a predictive algorithm that's going to walk you through with a robot and a holographic nurse through your whole experience. This is like basic blocking and tackling that we should have been doing 10 years ago. And just automating the mundane tasks, right? That's the other thing. We have an iPhone or an Android that automates our calendar, that told us that this webinar is going to happen, right? Those are simple things that we need to be able to do in healthcare, and do it across. I mean, I could go on and on. As you know, I've been through almost all the different organizations and things from, not in sync calendaring and scheduling systems and EMRs and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to tackle the basics of, you have cancer. We're going to walk you. We're going to be with you throughout this. And guess what? Sometimes you're going to call us just to talk to us because you need an ear. And that's okay too.
All right, we're at the end of our time. Let's do a quick go round, and any thoughts that come up, any quick suggestions for Adam, anything, any businesses the rest of us are going to go and build because you forgot something, whatever. Why don't we just quickly go around? Why don't I start with you, Rosemarie?
I just love that you are not looking at it as tech only, and that you keep leading with the empathy part, because that's what usually leaves me cold when I go to conferences and just hear about some snazzy new bell and whistle and technology. It's not anywhere near going to be sufficient without the empathy part. So scale empathy. Great takeaway from today.
Jen?
I mean, I think we've covered so much ground. There's so much here, but I think it's just how do we keep up with how fast things change? And I have to give a plug for Matthew Zachary's podcast series, Cancer Mavericks, where he talks about the history of cancer treatments the last several decades. I mean, and you just see how unbelievably different things are than not too long ago. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see where things go in the next decade or two.
So just to give a heads up, Matthew is an advisor at Jasper. So
good.
There's a little bit
he's how I first heard of you.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Matthew.
He also owns JL's podcast too.
Yeah.
Man's in fingers in many parts.
He has no problem texting me like, you need to do this.
Yeah.
Casey.
Yeah, I'll second the lead with empathy, or move first with empathy, because that's the thing that does seem to be the most missing in so many interactions with the healthcare system. And I think it's because both sides feel, and particularly the clinical side, feel like they're slaves to the grind. But I'm just going to keep doing what I do, which is follow my adopted hometown, Richmond, Virginia's original hometown hero of the 20th century. Oh my God, Arthur Ashe. Hello, suddenly had a brain flip. But anyway, his dictum: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. That's what I do all day, every day, and I give that to you. It's just a good way to approach a big topic like this and a big project like you're involved in.
Well, thank you. I like that.
JL?
I know I said it before, I'll say it again. This is not a technology problem. Sexy AI is not going to make people's cancer experience better, at least in the near term. I always say that at some point there will be technologies that can do a lot of the things that we want them to do. They can't do them now, and probably won't be able to do them for our working lives. Again, I see technology as an enabler, a technology that facilitates human-to-human interaction, that makes our finite, limited empathetic humans, right? The universe of empathetic humans is actually very small, and it exists in finite numbers. So we have to figure out how to enable those people, how to make them more effective, how to transmit and scale them to some extent that we can scale human beings. So keep doing what you're doing. I like it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. So with that, we are over the end of our already longest THCB gang ever.
Woo!
We went somewhere. So I want to thank all of my guests today. We've lost early because of time constraints. Jeff Goldsmith from Charlottesville, Virginia, and Grace Cordovano from New Jersey. Still with us right to the end. Rosemarie Day from Boston, Massachusetts. Benz from San Francisco. Casey Quinlan from Arthur Ashe's hometown, Richmond, Virginia. And John Neptune from New York City. And our special guest today, and this whole discussion, which was really quite wonderful about cancer, was Adam Pellegini from Jasper Health. And Adam is somewhere in the wilds of Idaho. He really is in the wild. I always joke about Vince Curtis when he's here being in the wilds of Idaho. He's in Boise, but Adam, you really are out in the wilds. So
I'm in the wilds.
Absolutely in the wild. Well, I want to thank you very much, Adam, for coming on today. It was really a fascinating discussion, really fascinating to find out what Jasper is doing, fascinating to find out what, to understand the experiences of so many people who've been on the gang with cancer. And, I want to thank everybody for their contributions. And we will be back with a very different topic. We have Jen Goldensack from the Digital Medical Society on as our guest next week. But for now, I want to say that if you've been watching on the video or listening on the podcast, thanks for listening and watching and paying attention to THCB Gang. And thanks everyone for doing this.